All right, so we're diving into the future of New Mexico today. And, it's interesting. You've given us kind of a hodgepodge of information, a press release, a UNM newsroom article, some just like data points on, different challenges, even a YouTube video.
Yeah.
Comparing New Mexico and Arizona. It's going to be fun to see what we come up with, what kind of picture we can paint.
Yeah, I think there are going to be a lot of threads that we can weave together to form a bigger picture of what's to come in the state.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So I guess let's start with one of the more recent things. Climate change is on everybody's mind, and the governor just released a new executive order all about this idea of a climate-ready workforce and infrastructure. She's talking about spending billions of dollars, renewable energy projects, making sure roads and bridges can handle extreme weather. It's a big deal.
It is, and I think one of the really significant things about this, too, is that she's framing it as a climate-ready workforce and a climate-ready infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I think that signals a real shift in how we think about this.
Yeah.
Rather than just saying infrastructure development or just saying that, we're trying to catch up, she's saying we need to be ready.
Yeah, for the future, for what's coming.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's where seeing the billions of dollars from the state and federal levels, seeing that that's connected to things like the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, it really signals that this is not just a New Mexico thing, but this is something that's happening on a national scale.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, it could mean millions of jobs across the country.
Absolutely, yeah.
And, thinking about that climate-ready framing, I thought that was really smart because you're right. It's not just about fixing potholes. It's about making sure that whatever we're building is going to be able to stand up to the future, the future of climate.
And she really underscores that in the press release.
Yeah.
By talking about the recent fires and floods. In Ruidoso and the Mescalero Apache Nation, it's not a hypothetical for New Mexico.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is something that is already impacting the state, so it makes sense to prepare for the future.
So we have this push for a climate-ready future, and then in kind of a totally different direction, we have this UNM newsroom article about Project 2025. And this is a policy platform that, who knows? It might not go anywhere, but it could really change things if a certain political candidate wins the White House next year. And it just makes you wonder how much national politics could affect the governor's vision.
Right. And, of course, we need to mention here that we're not endorsing any particular political stance.
Yeah.
Or candidate, for that matter.
Yeah, of course not.
We're just looking at, if this hypothetical policy platform were to take effect, how that could potentially affect what's happening in New Mexico.
Right. It's like, what if this happens? What could it mean for New Mexico?
Right. Exactly.
So where do you see the biggest potential for conflict between this Project 2025 and what the governor's trying to do?
Well, I think the article highlighted a couple of areas pretty clearly. One is immigration.
Okay.
The governor has been very vocal about making New Mexico a welcoming place for immigrants, especially given our history and being a border state. But Project 2025 hints at much stricter policies. So that could really change things, not just, for the people who might be trying to come to New Mexico, but also, think about the economy. Think about the social fabric of the state. It could have a ripple effect.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a large immigrant population already. A lot of industries rely on that.
Exactly.
So it's not just about, people trying to come here. It's about people who are already here and how it could change their lives.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the economic side, right? The article also mentions some social issues like abortion rights.
Yeah.
And that's been a big point of contention between the governor and people who support this platform.
Yeah. And that just underscores how these national level debates, they aren't just theoretical. They have real consequences for real people on the ground. And then on top of all of that, there's this whole other layer of complexity with Agenda 47.
Yeah, right. What is that all about?
It's like, is this just a spinoff of Project 2025?
Yeah.
Is it more refined? The article almost made it sound like a distraction.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to rebrand it or something, make it more palatable, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But it raises some interesting questions. Like, is it a genuine attempt to address the concerns? Or just a way to repackage the same ideas?
Yeah.
Make it appeal to a wider audience.
It's almost like you're not even sure what you're looking at anymore.
Right, exactly.
But one thing's for sure. What happens in Washington impacts what happens here.
No question. National politics in New Mexico are very much intertwined. I think what happens at the federal level is going to play a big role in how this all unfolds.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. So let's take a look at some of the other sources. We've got some data here that really highlights some of the challenges New Mexico is facing. And then, of course, that YouTube video comparing us to Arizona. Should be interesting.
Yeah, I think these next pieces are really going to bring some of these abstract ideas down to earth.
Yeah, let's do it. So we've talked a lot about these big concepts like climate change and politics and stuff. But I think it's important to remember that there are real people living here in New Mexico who are dealing with all kinds of challenges every day. And these data snippets, these like stats, they paint a pretty stark picture, don't they?
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the big picture. But at the end of the day, these numbers represent real struggles, real families dealing with tough stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're talking about high rates of heart disease, cancer, accidents. I mean, even drug overdoses are on the rise.
Yeah.
And, we're talking about climate action. But it doesn't seem like we're meeting those goals. It's honestly, it can be kind of overwhelming,
I get it. It can be pretty daunting to see all these challenges laid out like that. But I think it's important to remember that data can also be empowering,
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, it gives us a starting point. Like,
Yeah.
okay, this is where we are. Now we know what we're dealing with. And then we can actually measure progress, see if the things we're doing are making a difference.
So instead of getting bogged down in all the bad news, we can use this data to chart a course forward.
Exactly. And it's not like New Mexico's just giving up. I mean, these snippets also mention all kinds of initiatives, expanding healthcare, trying to control pollution. There's even talk about maybe some new climate legislation.
Okay, so there's hope.
Oh, absolutely. New Mexico has always been a place of resilience and innovation. I mean, look at renewable energy. The state's been a leader in that for years. And there's so much amazing work happening at the community level. People working to address health disparities, environmental justice. It's really inspiring.
That's a really good point. It's easy to focus on the negative, but there are definitely some bright spots out there, which I guess brings us to Arizona.
Right?
I mean, it's easy to look over there and see their booming economy and all the growth they're having and feel a little, envious, maybe.
I think that's a natural reaction. But what if, instead of envy, we try to learn from their experience? What if we could figure out what they're doing right and apply some of those lessons to New Mexico's unique challenges?
Yeah, that's a good point. When I first saw that YouTube video comparing the two states, I thought it was going to be all about how Arizona is winning and New Mexico is losing.
Yeah.
But it actually brought up some things that I hadn't even thought about, like the whole thing about water access.
Yeah, the role of water is huge, and something that often gets overlooked when we compare these two desert states. Arizona's access to the Colorado River has been a major driver of its growth. I mean, think about it. Agriculture, industry, growing cities, they all need water.
And the video talked about how those historical water rights and all those agreements between states, they've really shaped Arizona's path, while New Mexico is kind of stuck with the limitations of the Rio Grande. And I had no idea that New Mexico and Texas have actually been fighting over water rights.
Yeah, water is a precious resource in the desert, and it's bound to create competition. But I also think this comparison highlights the need for creative solutions. Maybe there are ways for New Mexico to diversify its water sources or find more efficient ways to use the water we have.
Yeah, it's like instead of fighting over a limited supply, maybe we need to be thinking about how to work together to find new solutions. But it wasn't just water. The video also pointed out something else I hadn't considered: elevation and climate. Who knew that could make such a big difference?
Right. It's interesting. We think of Arizona and New Mexico as being pretty similar, but those little differences in elevation have had a huge impact. Arizona's lower elevation, a place like Phoenix, they attract all those retirees. The snowbirds looking to escape the cold. And that brings in people, wealth, all of that fuels economic growth, even things like sports culture.
Right. They even joked in the video about how Arizona has all these pro sports teams and New Mexico is still waiting for its turn. But I guess all that sunshine and warm weather, it's attractive to businesses too, right?
Absolutely. So you have all these factors working together, and it creates this cycle where growth leads to more growth. So the question for New Mexico is, how do we break into that cycle? How do we create our own path to prosperity?
I mean, we have incredible landscapes, a rich history, so much culture. Can't those be the things that draw people here?
They absolutely can be. It's about finding ways to showcase those strengths, telling the story of New Mexico in a way that resonates with people.
So maybe instead of trying to be the next Arizona, New Mexico needs to embrace what makes it unique.
I think you're onto something. New Mexico doesn't have to follow anyone else's playbook. It has the potential to create a future that's both prosperous and sustainable, one that honors its past and looks ahead to the future.
So we've talked about the challenges, and we've explored some possibilities. But what does all this mean for the person listening right now? Where do they fit into this?
That's the most important question of all. And I think the answer is simple. You have the power to shape the future of New Mexico. It starts with understanding the issues, engaging in your community, and making your voice heard.
It's really amazing when you think about it. We started with this idea of New Mexico becoming climate ready. Then we kind of went down this rabbit hole of national politics and all the ways that could affect things here. And then we looked at all those challenges. The data on healthcare and the environment. It's been a wild ride. But you know what? I'm still feeling pretty optimistic about New Mexico's future.
I am too. And I think what's really striking is that we didn't just uncover a bunch of problems. We found this mix of challenges but also opportunities. And woven through it all is this sense of, resilience that seems to be a big part of who New Mexico is.
That's such a good word, resilience, because it's not like there's just one thing that's going to determine what happens to New Mexico.
Right.
It's like all these different factors, all these choices that people are making every day.
Yeah. Think about those data points again. They showed us some pretty serious stuff, but they also highlighted all those efforts that are already happening to improve health, protect the environment. And those efforts aren't just happening in some government office somewhere. They're happening in communities all across the state.
Yeah. And I think that ties back to what we were talking about earlier with Arizona. It's so easy to look over there and think, oh, they're doing it right. We need to be more like them. But maybe that's not the answer.
I agree. Trying to copy someone else's success rarely works. New Mexico needs to find its own way. One that builds on our strengths, our culture. What makes us unique?
So we've got all these pieces of the puzzle: climate, politics, economics, health, the environment. It seems like the question isn't just what's going to happen. It's what kind of future do we want to create?
And that's a question that everyone in New Mexico needs to ask themselves. What are your values? How do you see the future of this state? And what role are you willing to play in making that vision a reality?
That's powerful. So what's your final takeaway? What do you want our listeners to remember from this whole conversation?
I want them to remember this. The future of New Mexico isn't set in stone. It's a story that's still being written, and every single person can contribute to that story. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. Your vision for the future matters. So don't underestimate the power you have to shape the world around you, starting right here in New Mexico.
Well said. It's been a great conversation. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.